Originally, when I was asked to speak at this forum, I was asked to speak to an introduction to the Housing First concepts and to also bring to light how intensive case management can help provide supports to Housing First work being done. In addition to that, I've been asked to provide a little bit of extra information around housing procurement, which some folks may already be involved in, some people maybe want to learn more about. Given that ask and given a resource that RainCity actually already had at hand, I felt that to stand up here and give you a slide deck full of words and for you to hear those words come out of my mouth probably wouldn't do it as much justice as we have a series of videos as well as a facilitator's handbook and a participant handbook so that people can actually bring the Housing First materials, best practice, right into their own organizations and facilitate dialogue with new teams, old teams, whoever you want to. Bring it to your counselors, whoever. But that series of videos, I think, given that there's information in there from housing procurement specialists, from peer support workers, from clients or participants in the at-home study, from psychiatry, really there's a lot more that you can learn from these videos. So I've really structured today's presentation on Housing First, ICM, and housing around these videos. I apologize because there are some people in this room that I think have seen one or two of these videos before, but hopefully you won't mind having another look at them. Every time that I watch them, there's always something new that I find that I learn. So I have two introductory slides that just speak to the definition of Housing First. Thank you. For people who aren't familiar with sort of the definition or the concept of Housing First, it's the idea that everyone has a right to housing. It's not something that you need to be ready for or earn, that every individual really deserves a safe place to live. Within Housing First, there's 5 Housing First principles, which are listed here. You're also going to hear about each one of the videos is structured around one of these principles. There's also some, I think, references around the room to these principles. So with that, I think we're going to kick off and I'll show you the first video.
Housing First has 5 key principles. If you're not following the 5 principles, it's not Housing First. Principle number 1, immediate access to housing with no housing readiness conditions. Participants meet with a support team once per week, but housing is not dependent on psychiatric treatment, abstinence, or other readiness conditions. And when we say no housing readiness conditions, we mean none. Now, many participants stay housed in their first rental, but evictions happen. With the support team's help, it's an opportunity for learning, adjusting, and the immediate chance to try again. Research shows Housing First reduces emergency room visits, hospitalization, shelter use, detox services, and incarceration. There are no common indicators that predict who Housing First will and won't work for. So given its effectiveness, let's focus on Housing First, then let participants tell us the next step. Principle number 2, consumer choice and self-determination. This principle highlights that participants want and can make productive change occur in their lives. But in order to thrive, meaningful housing options are a necessity, and research shows that a majority of participants prefer independent market housing throughout the city. Now, in order to foster learning and self-determination, it's important that the team support most choices participants make. Though the team can point out expectations, they should avoid overprotecting participants from learning opportunities. When choices have poor outcomes, a supported learning environment promotes more informed choices in the future, reducing long-term harm and increasing self-sustainability. Principle number 3, recovery orientation. People are more likely to do well and achieve personal goals when they have an opportunity to find their own recovery. Housing First relies on supporting people as they work at their pace towards self-defined goals, whether it's treatment, returning to work, or reconnecting with family. The addition of peer workers on the support team addresses power dynamics, increases safety, and models hope for both participants and team members. Finally, by building, following, and reviewing strength-based recovery plans, the support team can spend less time managing crisis and more time on the steps that lead to the participants' goals for recovery. Principle number 4, individualized and person-driven supports. Now, support is meant to fit the participant, not the other way around. People are at the center of Housing First. Therefore, the support team provides appropriate team members, approach, and tools that help each individual with their goals. Whether that's grocery shopping, working, adopting a pet, finances, therapy, or engaging with new communities. By replacing complicated policies with flexible models and a can-do philosophy, the team helps participants reduce long-standing systemic barriers, thereby improving self-determination, choice, and quality of life. Principle number 5, social and community integration. Moving to a new area can be a hard experience for anyone and can make you feel pretty isolated and lonely. The Housing First team can help participants build community connections based on their specific needs and interests. The team also fosters community development by providing landlords and community members with education on Housing First, inclusion, and myth-busting negative stereotypes. And though supporting social and community integration may take time, it can go a long way in helping participants establish relationships and support networks within new communities.
We did have the luxury during the at-home project to work with MPA. You saw Sue Baker, a director with MPA. During that video, they're speaking on their experience with Housing First. They did a fabulous job of working alongside of both the ACT and ICM teams within the at-home project to go out and find these landlords. Unfortunately, Sue wasn't able to come and speak today, but I have been able to sit side by side with Sue through that project and also through a number of presentations. So I think that I can probably do some justice to the work that they do in terms of communicating how that went. They did have portfolio development officers that went around to different landlords, different property management companies, and proposed this idea of doing something a little different. During the at-home project, they did have a pool of money where they could go to a landlord and say, listen, we're looking to house some folks. We're wondering, can we have 1 unit, 2 units, maybe 3 units in your building? We're going to pay the rent on that unit, whether or not there's someone in there or not, which I think was key for the landlords. Like, it's a way of incentivizing landlords. They also did talk about the fact that, you know, whoever is going to live in that apartment is going to be being provided service by a wraparound team, a team that you can call 24 hours a day. Somebody's going to answer the phone and get back to you about what you need to do to move forward. It might be phoning the police, it might be a home visit within 24 hours, but they did promise responsiveness from either the ICM or ACT teams. But having that, I'll call it stock or reserve, you'll hear me talk about it later, I think was really key to rapid housing of folks so that we could go out and meet with somebody. And the following day, like, we've housed people in less than 24 hours, you know, get folks in, get some furniture set up, make sure that they have some groceries in the fridge, and their utilities are set up. So I think that that was really key. The housing procurement, or like the portfolio development officer, worked very closely with the teams. There were weekly meetings where we talked about issues that might, like the landlord might talk to the portfolio development officer, they might talk directly with the team, they might talk with the landlord, but we were always in dialogue about what was going on with the landlords, what was going on with the tenants. You know, did it make sense to have somebody move on? Was it not a good fit, you know, for that individual in that building? Whatever was happening, it wasn't just about managing evictions, it was about managing that person's tenancy. So, what do I have on this slide? Oh, the other thing, sorry, I'm just gonna try to, so that was during the at-home project. Currently, we have Youth House and an ICM team that we're also running. The Youth House is doing its own housing procurement, and it's actually they've been very successful. They're doing that housing procurement in Vancouver, and people say, well, the vacancy rates are so low. How do you manage to get apartments? We go on to PadMapper, we go on to Craigslist, the same ways that other people would try and find an apartment if they needed to move. That's where we go. We do those housing searches, we take folks out and have them meet up with landlords. Even though the vacancy rate is so low, we're talking about housing 10, 20, 30, 50 people, but when you look at the vacancy rate and what number of units of housing that actually is in a city the size of Vancouver, there's stock there and housing available. And we've got a blended model in Surrey where we're using a housing procurement, like MPA is working with us again in Surrey to do housing procurement, but the team is also doing a lot of its own procurement because of some of the special needs of the individuals that we're serving. It's easy to go and sort of get general stock of housing. If you say, I want a one-bedroom apartment, fabulous. But when it gets down to a one-bedroom apartment that is maybe like a basement suite, and it has to have a window, and it has to allow for dogs, and we need it to also allow for smoking, that some of those really specialized searches or laneway houses, those types of things can get a bit tricky, and that's where the team usually gets involved in procuring those apartments with folks. The affordability of housing is absolutely 100% imperative. I have met with Sam about this before. We've seen a lot of housing first teams that struggle because of the cost of housing. They cannot get people housed. It is expected that these individuals spend no more than 30% of their income on housing. That means building relationships with people that have deep pockets. I don't know if you see housings in the room, but that we have to find some way to supplement people's, they're on a very limited income. You're gonna hear Heather speak to poverty, that even when they're only spending 30% of their income on their housing, they're living in poverty. So that I think is absolutely essential. Responsiveness I've talked about. It is expected that rehousing will happen. We do have some folks from the At Home Project that are still with the ACT team that have been rehoused 6 times. That happens. But we also have people from the At Home Project that were housed that are still in their first apartment. That's really cool when that happens too. But I'd say most people, it's usually 2 apartments, which I think is really important to sort of remember. It's housing first, then supports, not like housing first and exit. Be cautious of saturation. Quite often we'll find landlords that really want to be helpful, so they're like, here's 2 units, and then you can have the unit next door to that one, and before you know it, you have 5 or 10 units in their building. But really that's just almost replicating a congregate setting, where there's a lot of people who are sort of struggling with the same issues, that there isn't really that influence of that scattered site model or community, the larger community, that can help people maybe move on closer to their goals. And then planning for discharge from admission. Whether or not your program is time limited based on funding, or time limited based on the mandate of your program, when you're engaging landlords and housing people and you're saying, yes, this person has this fabulous responsive team that's going to be able to be accessed should anything happen, but you sort of leave out the fact that we're going to discharge them 18 months from now and then you're on your own, I think that you have to be planning those conversations along the way. Like, when are you going to talk with the landlord about that? How are you going to broach that conversation? Because it can become really awkward otherwise if all of a sudden you're discharging, the landlord's going, well, I agreed to this one set of circumstances and now there's something completely different going on. So those would be my tips for housing procurement. Happy to talk more about that during the World Cafe or after. I really do feel like the social inclusion principle in video number 5, if I had to give my last 10 minutes away, that's where I would give it away. Hopefully you guys will, I think that this is sort of the emotional side of housing first for me, and sort of offloading the responsibility of homelessness from the individual that's homeless to the community at large, and trying to understand how we can move from seeing people who are homeless as those people and actually see them as human beings that are part of our community, that have value, that contribute, and all of those other great things. So I'm going to turn on video number 5. If, Linda, at the end you decide that you want to hear about ICM, if there's time for that, then I can do that formally as a group. If not, then I'll be out and about. But I think that you've heard a lot about the outreach and types of work that are done by both the ACT and the ICM teams through the video. I would briefly suggest that anybody that is deeply interested in a good read, or not, long read. There are some provincial standards for intensive case management in BC that define intensive case management, talk about the teams, the composition, evaluation, the difference between ACT and ICM. So happy to direct people towards this resource or chat about ICM or ACT a little bit more after the fact. And here's the last video. I think certainly number 5 is the key, that housing's just the beginning, that it's about the supports that come in play after that. Again, these videos and the participant workbook and facilitator workbook are available if you visit our website, which is on the bottom of the slide, RainCityHousing.org. There'll be links to direct you towards the videos and the resources. If you shoot an email to the email address there, we'll make sure that we get you the PDF versions of the resources, or we can mail some out to you if you'd like that as well. Thank you very much.